Sue and I met in the mid-1980s as doctoral students at University of Wisconsin-Madison, and we remained close until her death. Our children are about the same ages, so we got together not only to talk about work, but as families. Our children played together and we ate together. I graduated a year before Sue, and when my family and I departed Madison for my first university position, after the moving van was packed and departed, we had dinner and stayed overnight at Sue's and left the next morning after breakfast. We supported each other in our work, but my sense is that I benefited from our relationship more than she did from knowing me. Sue's writing was always clear and to the point, and she would read drafts of my work and help me to become a better writer. We both graduated and moved on, but stayed in touch, reading each other's work and supporting one another through life's trials. It seemed to me that Sue cared about two things: her relationship with people and social justice. What counted for her was not awards or recognition for her work, but that her work made a difference in people's lives. When we met, typically as academics or at conferences, she talked not about her research and writing as much as she did about her children and husband, about friends and colleagues, and about her students and teachers she worked with in the community. She believed in the Deweyan sense, that change occurred through ongoing relationships, the continuum of experience. When we would get together at conferences, it was almost invariably at meals with her students, who talked about how much she mentored them. She put an inordinate amount of effort into teaching and learning with her students. She identified with teachers and other members of what she would have described as the working class. She knew that the real work of the world was done in the classrooms of the world, in the day-to-day relationships between adults and students. She wanted to support that work in whatever way she could. Sue's life was dedicated to her students, friends, and family, rather than seeking attention for herself. I suspect that if she were here, she would deflect the discussion away from herself and into how others made her work possible. She was the rare, humble academic. The legacy of her life will continue to remind me of what is important and what remains to be done. We will all miss her.
Sue and I met in January 1987 in the elementary ed program of University of Wisconsin-Madison at the first meeting for the spring semester, when I was a brand new grad student and Sue was one of the old-timers. And we formed a deep friendship there, had an enormous amount of fun, and that fun continued all the way through until just before she died. The fun I think was an underestimated part of Sue. She had not only a terrific capacity for the nasty cryptic statement or the critical twist on observations about the world, politics, one's own and everyone else's idiocies, but she also enjoyed the great little pleasures of the world: children, music, flowers, herbs, the view out the window, and, of course, smokes. Even though she was a bit guilty about that, but she still loved her smokes. She liked the ways that she could meet people and do different things while having a little smoke gave her time out. So, while she was a tough theorist, and she was quite clear about her own positioning, she wrote and acted with great humility, and she spent most of her time believing that scholarship was a service to other people in the cause of justice. And all her projects and her writing was directed towards that. She wrote with students, she wrote with colleague teachers, she wrote for them, and she wrote about them in order to help spread the word about that it is possible to make a little difference. Sue's work, I think, falls into several areas. One is teacher education more broadly. Another is social studies teacher education, curriculum studies, and action research, which is probably most well known around the world. The action research work brought her keynotes and visits to places as diverse as Colombia and Liverpool. But her students and colleagues, those who learned with her and from her, are spread on all of the continents.
Sue was then one of 3 Americans who I invited to be respondents at the MOHD symposium at AERA in 1998. And I'm sure it was because of her presence on the team that we were given a larger room and attracted a bigger audience than I've ever had at any other occasion when I spoke at AERA. It was a wonderful occasion. Sue was inspirational in the development of the handbook. She brought a US side, I brought a UK side, and we each had slightly different networks of contacts who we put together. So I think that added greatly to the strength of the book. At my suggestion, we used Sue's 3 dimensions of action research as the organising framework for the book. They were taken, as you know, from her 1997 paper in the Review of Research in Education, edited by Michael Apple. And they were empirically drawn from her reading of the literature, which was wider than anyone's reading of the literature, I think, at that time. I like them particularly, still like them particularly, because they're non-hierarchical. They don't distinguish any kind of action research as being better than any other. And they have fluid boundaries, so it's possible to avoid sort of very contrasting boundaries between different kinds of action research. Her wonderful first chapter for the handbook, which is called Revisiting the Professional, Personal and Political Dimensions of Action Research, re-explored those dimensions 10 years on and sort of brought it up to date with the current work. Working on the handbook was a source of powerful professional and personal learning for us both, I think, and it led to the close friendship with Sue that I had always wanted and had actually found difficult to establish until that time. We both read all the drafts, we agreed on the text of the comments we sent back to authors, and we supported each other in our own writing for the book, so that when the task seemed overwhelming for one, the other was always there. I was last in touch with Sue over the good news that the handbook was to be published in a paperback edition in time for AERA 2013. She told me of her illness in that email, in which she said that it had given her a stronger sense of being in lots of ways and a new kind of centre for living, which I thought was amazing, and I shall remember what she said when my time comes. I did not expect her to pass away so soon, so the news was a great shock, and of course I regretted I had not written more frequently since and kept in closer touch. But I think I hang on to the feeling that I was privileged to work with her so closely, and she is a great loss to me, both personally and professionally, but I have wonderful memories of her which I will keep with me always, and I shall always celebrate Susan Noffke.
My connection with Sue goes back well over 10 years. Sue and I first met when she attended the Participatory Action Research Conference, which was held, I think it was in Pretoria in South Africa in about 1999. Melanie Walker, who was one of my doctoral supervisors at the time and who had introduced me to action research, said, "You should meet Sue Noffke, I think you'll like her." So without knowing her or much about her or really much about her work, I invited her to come and visit us in Cape Town. It was a leap of faith. I had no idea what she looked like. We did not Skype or Facebook much in those days. In fact, we barely emailed. So I didn't really even know what she looked like, and I just assumed I would know her when I met her at the airport. Well, I did know her, I did recognize her, and as Melanie said, I did like her. There are 2 aspects of Sue that played a very big part in my life. The one was the amazing way in which she brought people together, and she made them feel special. She did that for me a couple of times. One example was when she invited me with a group of other people to be part of a panel at the very first qualitative inquiry conference in Urbana-Champaign. And then she invited me, some of us then, to write a chapter for the Sage Handbook of Action Research that she and Bridget Summock were editing. It's not just ideas that drove Sue, but also respect and support for the people who would carry out these ideas. The other aspect of Sue that meant a lot to me was her view that action research needed to be understood in context. In other words, this was not an idealized approach to research, but needed, and in fact needs, to be understood within the real struggles and conditions of people's lives. For us in South Africa, who were working with action research, this was really important, as it reminded us, as we remind ourselves all the time, in fact, that theory is not something that clever people in the Northern Hemisphere teach us, but it's a set of ideas that are out there in the public domain that we need to engage with. And of course, this is even more so with something like action research, based as it is on notions of participation, meaning, deep meaning, and change. Those of us who work in universities can so easily think that the world revolves around books and ideas. Well, Sue reminded us all the time, in both word and deed, that it is so much more than that. In May 2013, I came to the USA on a Fulbright scholarship, part of which included time at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. I had asked Sue to be my host some time before that, due to our shared interest in teacher education and social justice. I really thought time there with Sue would be a very valuable learning experience because of this. But when she told me about her illness, I was a little bit hesitant to come because I feared being an additional burden on her life. But she insisted this was not the case, and she went out of her way to welcome me, to make arrangements for my visit, to introduce me to people. Her friends and her husband Bob told me that she was excited about my coming, and I do believe them, although she was clearly weak. A week before I was due to leave the United States, and a few days after her son's wedding, which sadly she could not attend due to complications in her illness, she was taken to hospital. I therefore could not thank her personally for hosting me and everything that she had done for me. So I asked Bob to take a note to her. I think that she was probably too ill to receive the note, and I'm not sure whether she received it or read it or heard it. In South Africa, when somebody dies, we say, "Hamba kahle," which means go well. And so I end by saying, "Hamba kahle, Sue, we will miss you."